Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hollow and today we have a new build for you. This one is centered around this absolutely beautiful and sadly underused sword. I mean, its design is really cool and for some reason it's got like a red glow towards the end of it. This is of course the Helphen Steeple, which is both a magical and ice greatsword. Thanks to its Ash of War, Ruinous Ghost Flame, a unique Ash of War. We swing the sword to bathe its blade in Ghost Flame, and that Ghost Flame adds magic damage to the attacks and also a bitterly cold bite. It looks incredible, like it's such a cool visual effect, and sadly underused, I would say, overall. And despite its lack of use, look at the damage you can actually output with these weapons. We've created a sort of magic melee build to make the Steeple work, and it actually works really well. Take it in PvP, for example. That Ash of War to buff the weapon is also, surprisingly, actually an attack, which can be nice chip damage while you're buffing up at the same time. That means we can swap to our offhand and then come back and buff the Steeple up easily mid-fight, meaning we can two-hand, say, a Dark Moon Greatsword and make incredible use of this intelligence weapon and its ranged heavy attack, which you can send out quickly or slowly if you charge it up fully for more damage, which works great for an execution attack in, say, a boss fight, or an incredible mix-up in PvP where you keep the enemy guessing. They're not safe at range. You can change the timing, of course, of that swing, catching them in a roll really well, and then easily swap back to the power stance. Use the Steeple, buff it up, do an attack at the same time. Now both weapons are buffed, and you know what? Both of them do ice damage. So this is a frost build as well. When that pops, it'll do a big burst of damage, make the enemy take more damage now, and they even recover stamina slower, so that's nice in PvP. This is a magical ice status build with powerful range capabilities, huge burst if you can spam the power attacks in PvE or PvP, and we added a little bit of flair to it using the Terra Magica buff, this buff zone, this sigil. While we're standing in it, all of your magic damage is increased. Both of our weapons, of course, are magic weapons, so it just increases your damage further. In a boss fight, that actually works really well because you can control the fight. You can choose to just stay in the circle. The boss comes to you. You get all of that bonus damage. Yeah, it's surprisingly effective. In PvP, it's a bit of a different story. Most of the time when I put this down, people are like, well, I'm not going to fight him. I'll stay away from him. But sometimes you put this buff down and they come running at you blindly, not realizing you're actually a melee build and you want that. So it's nice to get the extra damage when it does work if you can play the mind games with it. Still, if they choose to play at range, no problem. Just pull out the Dark Moon and start spamming your ranged heavy attack, which costs no FP, so you can just do it infinitely as long as you got the stamina. Yeah, it's a versatile build. It's very fun. Whether you're making use of good trading using the big damage of the power stance greatswords, yeah, you can't really trade with this in a safe way. We're seeing about 800 to 1,000 damage with one power stance hit where you're hitting with both blades. In a trade, that is horrifying. Roughly the same damage with a fully charged Dark Moon range attack as well. It's outrageous. If you're somehow not convinced, I want you to take a look at my AR on these two weapons when fully buffed. 1,269 in the main hand weapon, which is actually doing more than that because it's also having enhanced magic damage due to its buff. And then we have 1,325 on the offhand on the Dark Moon, which does stupid damage when you two-hand it, and of course use the fully charged heavy attack, which is insanely effective. And like I said, just because I did that, I've lost the buff on the other weapon. No problem. It's both an attack and a buff. Works perfectly. The downside, of course, to this build then is the fact that you do need to do quite a lot of buffs before the fight happens, say in PvP. That can be a bit of a problem. Obviously, it's within anyone's right, whether it's an invasion or a duel, to stop you from buffing and interrupt you, or maybe just cleanse you with that spell. You don't have to fully buff to do well with this build though. Simply popping a Wondrous Physic and then buffing up the weapons with their Ashes of War, that's more than enough and very effective in PvP. Everything else is just a nice add-on or a bit utility or fun. The buff of the Steeple is also an attack right, so it does that bit of chip damage. You might recognize this animation though and how it works in PvP. It comes out surprisingly quick, much like the Godslayer's Greatsword, which has the same thing. Sadly, there's no follow-up though. With the Godslayer's Greatsword, you can use it twice and you can use a heavy to sort of do some melee and fire combos. It's really cool. With this one, it is just the swing and the buff, sadly, but it's still very effective as an attack as well as a buff. I find in PvE that when I'm fully buffed and I've got everything up and I'm fighting in the sigil, doing jumping attacks works really well. well. Not only am I getting massive damage by doing a double attack with these buffed up weapons, but it's also going to stagger bosses and enemies. You do this a couple times, they'll stagger, that's free damage for you. And because it's frost weapons, yeah, you're going to get that burst of frost once that builds up, getting more damage and also ruining their stamina. It's like the longer the fight goes on, the better it is for you. In PvE, setting up the build in full is consistent, reliable, and something you can do before every boss fight. But now it's time to explain the build. I'm sure you're wondering why I'm wearing this outfit itself. Well, actually, surprisingly, it actually enhances the damage. This is the full Rogia set or the Spellblade set. Each piece says this: strengthens glintstone sorcery skills, but what it doesn't say is another aspect of it, how it enhances your Ash of War damage by 2%. Each piece you're wearing. So we're wearing 4, that's 8% increased damage on our Ash of War. So what that does is it increases the damage of this attack. While not major, you know, it's not a massive hit, it's nice to just increase the power of the attack. I mean, why wouldn't we? Of course, we're using the Helphen Steeple and the Darkmoon Greatsword as our main weapons. I've got a unbuffed Finger Seal just as the option to get our single face spell for the buff. And we're using the Carrion Regal Scepter, the Moon Scepter, as it does boost full moon sorcery and has incredible intelligence scaling. Technically, you could work in some other spells into this build if you have some nice FP and you want to manage your stats well. It's entirely possible. As the talismans go, yeah, we're using Ash of Wars, so we want to improve their power, so the Shadow of Alexander works. We have the magic Scorpion Charm, which is going to raise our magic attack but lowers damage negation. This is brilliant in PvE, wonderful in PvP. I wouldn't really recommend running this. It's nice to have the extra damage, and if you can get away with it, sure, but it's probably much more reasonable to run, say, the Dragon Crest Great Shield to reduce your physical damage, the damage taken that is, or say a Bull Goat's Talisman to raise your poise, considering we're wearing quite a light set, and it'll help with that. Then we have the Carrion Filigreed Crest, which is going to lower the FP cost of our Ashes of War and the skills that we're using. Since we're spamming them out, yeah, it's pretty nice to have this. However, for further PvE damage, you can actually swap this out and run something like the Claw Talisman. Since, yes, in PvE we're doing a lot of double jump attacks, hey, why not make them stronger, right? And then lastly, as our buffer, as our filler, it's always Erdtree's Favor. More health, more stamina, more equip load. It's always good. It's one of the best talismans in the game. Lastly, our Wondrous Physic. Yep, it's very important that since we're using a magic-based damage build, the Magic Shrouding Cracked Tear for a 3-minute boost of your magic attacks. That's always going to be good. And this all leads to those ridiculous numbers. Nearly 1,300 damage on both weapons is outrageous when they're both one-handed and we can power stance them. With all the utility of being able to, say, swap to the Dark Moon and two-hand that, do the heavy attack, catch people out with a surprising attack of the buff of the Steeple, or just rely on the great trading potential that is power stance greatswords. They're awesome. In PvP, loads of options here, and you can really outplay opponents. The more I played with this build, the more comfortable it got, the more fun it got. For me, any excuse to use the Darkmoon Greatsword is worthy. I love this weapon, but I'm really happy to be using Helphen Steeple at least a little bit, because it's a really underused and underloved weapon. It's really cool. Now, before I forget, here's a quick showcase of the buffing sequence. So we're using Wondrous Physic, and then we're going to do Flame Grant Me Strength. From here, we can now pull out the Darkmoon Greatsword and buff up with Moonlight Greatsword. Then we're going to go to our staff and put down Terra Magica, then swap to our main weapon, the Steeple. We can use the Ash of War, and now we're completely, fully buffed, ready to go. And of course, we can swap to our Dark Moon and buff up to maintain that buff if we want. Use the heavy attack. And when we swap to power stance, we're just going to need to do the Ash of War to get the buff again. And it's as simple as that. But that is, of course, the build and the setup. Let me know what you think. I really like magic melee builds. There isn't a massive amount of options in Elden Ring, so it's really cool to see this. Full props to Josh for coming up with the build. It's really cool. If you're interested in the stats that I'm running, they're on screen now. I would say that you could lose a little bit of mind since I'm not casting many spells. Maybe pop some more strength or dex in there for more melee damage if you want. If you've enjoyed the build and the video, though, and like to see more of this style of video, then please drop a like on it. For now, though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.